Welcome to Top Traits for Success on the Job, sponsored by the American Bar Association. Moderating the program today is Kathy Morris. Kathy is founder of Under Advisement Limited and former Director of Career Counseling and Placement for Northwestern University School of Law, former Director of the ABA Career Resource Center and the Center for Continuing Legal Education. She has decades of experience with guiding law students, lawyers, and law firms, focusing on attorney training and professional development. Kathy, you may begin.
Thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. Wherever you're joining us from, we're happy to have you. I'd like to quickly introduce our two wonderful speakers. Paula Davis-Laack is actually an internationally published writer and blogger. She's a frequent speaker, and she's a top 10 influencer, which I think is very interesting and something probably most lawyers aren't familiar with, but should look at it and become familiar. It's very interesting. She has a master's in applied positive psychology, and she formerly practiced law. Lovingly, she says, burnt out, and then moved on to a related career, and we're happy to have her today. Jim is also a former practicing lawyer, a litigator, and he then became the Associate Director for Career Development at GW Law School. Some of you may be on the line as GW alums. We welcome you and everyone else. Jim then moved into lawyer development in law firms, and now he is the Director of Attorney Training and Development at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman. He's with us today from D.C. Paul is in Chile, Wisconsin. Jim is also the chair of the International Professional Development Consortium, which we call the PDC, and he too is a leading light and has been in the profession for quite a long time. Now, I hope you know, I'm the moderator of the ABA series, and I think that's could be enough said about me. You've got the slides. If you haven't listened in before to one of our programs, quickly I'll go over the agenda. We have a discussion, a conversation among the faculty, between the faculty and myself. We go to some quick tips. We go to your questions, so feel free to send them in. We probably won't get to all of them. Don't feel offended. It's a quick 45 minutes, but we do want to hear from you. We have a change up the pace again with agree, disagree, where I put out a statement and one of the faculty will agree or disagree and quickly say why. Again, we try to take more questions throughout. We don't wait till the end. We have some takeaways, some practical suggestions for you, and then I'll show you a few of the other resources, both for the series and from the ABA in general. I put up a few success traits. These are just touches the surface, just so you definitely have a context and see what it is we're going to focus on. There are many more. If you think, gee, aren't there sort of task-based things? What about being a good writer? Yes, those are success traits as well. It's not just by personality or by affinity, but it's important for us to think broadly when we think about what success traits are. And that way we're going to cover as many as we can today and try to hit on some for the not only junior but seasoned lawyers, going beyond the obvious, how you can develop success traits that you may not have or deepen those you do. And again, we definitely want to hear from all of you. So that said, let me toss it out to Jim. Let's start with you, Jim. Quickly, sort of what are the top couple of traits in your experience that lawyers who succeed right out of the gate tend to share?
Right. Well, thank you, Kathy, and I'm delighted to be here. I think right out of the gate, it's all about making a positive first impression, and it's assumed that your lawyerly skills are in order and that you have the education and skills to be an effective attorney. But I would say sort of energy and enthusiasm as well as responsiveness are really key sort of out of the gate to make a first impression and to make others want to work with you again.
Oh, that's interesting because people tend to think about themselves and what will make them successful, but it's also important for them to think about what will make others want to continue to work with them. Very, very interesting. Paula, a couple quick thoughts on some success traits that matter early in the career?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kathy. I think first and foremost, it's important for lawyers to develop their resilience. So that ability and that set of skills to be able to bounce back and grow and thrive during challenge, change, and stress, which I think every lawyer is pretty much going to encounter throughout their career. I think it's also important for lawyers to think about developing an optimistic thinking style, because lawyers are really trained pessimistic thinkers, and rightfully so. But also thinking about the other side of that, developing those optimistic thinking skills.
Again, I think so many lawyers think that to be pessimistic is important as well, because then you're cautious, you're seeing the downside, you're sort of thinking about from the other side's perspective. Is it true that, I guess I don't want to call it pessimistic thinking, but the flip side of optimistic is also something to chart and to think about, as opposed to only trying to be optimistic on all fronts?
Yeah, Kathy, that's a great point. And I think it's really important for lawyers to continue to hone some of that pessimistic thinking, because that's really what makes good lawyers good lawyers. But it's also important, too, to know when to turn off that skill set, because when you go into meetings with other lawyers or you're working with some of your colleagues, being pessimistic all the time isn't necessarily the best thing. And we know that from research, optimistic thinkers tend to get sick less frequently, they perform better, and they're happier and experience less depression.
Huh. Okay, well, Jim or Paula, I think some of those are really kind of some of the things we haven't even thought about yet when we scratch the surface for what lawyer success traits would be. But what about some additional traits lawyers tend to overlook? I think that that's going to be the most helpful to them today. What else might they not realize? What else might they not realize is a success trait that they should try to incorporate?
Well, I'll mention one that I think lawyers often take for granted, which is confidence. I think that lawyers are educated, they've done well in school to get where they are, but when it comes to going into a meeting or how they couch things in an email, what they put in writing to a colleague, how they speak in informal settings, I think that they can sort of unwittingly come across as not as confident as they might. And that's another instance where when you're making first impressions, that coming across with confidence is extremely important. Because if you don't, the more seasoned attorney is likely to sense it, and that will concern the more seasoned attorney.
Okay. We're going to get to some quick tips in a minute, but Paula, any other thoughts like that? I think it's interesting on the confidence. People sort of, if they tend to give respect to others as we want them to, then they may hold back and not speak up. They may think that somebody else surely knows what it is they're thinking, and then they don't participate, and then they might be thought to lack confidence. And so it's a very tricky business, these success traits, because they tend to have a flip side. Paula, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think another success trait that I would add is, not only for new attorneys but also for seasoned attorneys as well, is this whole notion of being able to build solid relationships. I mean, lawyers, so much of what they do is the relationship business, managing their relationships with their clients, with their colleagues. For younger attorneys, it's managing relationships with the partners that they work for. So I think being able to have that ability to build strong relationships is crucial.
Okay, and what are some success traits sort of to get underneath that, building relationships? What kind of skills or traits do you need, to be able to do that? Because it's a good concept. I think people want to build relationships, but we see so many people who, in the press of work, they keep their head down, they focus on, their assignment. What can they do differently to try to build or deepen the skills for relationship making?
Yeah, one of my favorite skills is actually something called active constructive responding, or for short we call it ACR. And that's simply nothing more than when somebody shares good news with you, taking about 30 to 45 seconds to actually respond by asking a couple of questions. And I think, we go throughout our day so much dealing with, as lawyers, the negative and what could go wrong, that we oftentimes just completely miss and blow by those opportunities when people are coming to us with good news. So again, just taking a couple of minutes not even that long, just when somebody shares good news to say, wow, how was that for you, and actually reliving that moment with the person.
That's a good suggestion. Sometimes these things are just opportunities in the moment that we don't see. We have an audience question from one of our law schools, and it gets back to the issue of confidence, which is a tough one. And the question is, what are the best ways to demonstrate confidence in the way you speak? And the person asks, such as modulating your voice, intonation, etc. As I say, some of it is just actually participating, speaking up at the right times, but what other ways are there to demonstrate confidence, and in particular in this question, in the way that you speak?
Well, speaking is a big one, and it's a timely one for me to talk about because we just had firm-wide oral communication skills where we had a coach go to our various offices and meet with attorneys. And what we see is that, especially with a more junior generation, is there is a lot of upward inflection in people's voices when they speak, and it's actually with both genders. And in some cases, people aren't even aware that they do it. And generationally, when more senior people hear someone speak with an upward inflection, that might suggest that the person lacks confidence. And it's as simple as having yourself recorded and watching yourself, listening to yourself speak, that you might start noticing that. And it's something that you can train yourself to stop doing. But it does take some effort, and it also requires, the courage to listen to yourself be recorded like that. But that's just one example of something that people do every day that they may not even be aware of.
Somebody is asking from the audience, what do we mean by upward inflection? Is there any way to demonstrate that? Is that what I just did?
My name is Jim Lovelace, and I work at Pillsbury.
I see. Okay, it sounds like a question sometimes as opposed to a statement.
Right.
And that tends to make people think you may lack confidence. I think there was another study we just saw on the national news, which recorded men and women saying the same exact thing in an interview, and the feedback from experienced interviewers was that the male seemed more confident. And I think I've seen this over time, that there are generational issues, there are some gender issues. Women and have to consider as well. If you say something in a meeting, use good inflection, use good tone, et cetera, and they tend to pass you by. Don't take that as a sign that you shouldn't say anything else. Keep at it. Keep at it in a pleasant conversational way, as we all should. And that takes judgment. And one of the audience people said there's a thin line between confidence and hubris. And there's also a thin line between confidence and arrogance, I might add. So the question was, is body language or speech more telling, or one or the other? And I don't want to get too focused on this trait of confidence, but anybody quickly, is body language or speech more telling, or is one, or are they both important?
I'll let you take that one, Paula.
Yeah, sure, that's great. No, I think they're both absolutely critical components of delivering an effective message. And one of the things that I would just add to this discussion are 2 C's that I often think about: remaining clear and controlled when you're talking, particularly if you're engaging, say, with opposing counsel or with somebody who is maybe acting in a little bit more of an aggressive manner. Staying centered in a way that will allow you to communicate clearly and in control is important.
I would just add, Kathy, that I think the voice is probably more important as much as people talk on the phone and they deal with each other remotely. That as a result, I think body language is that people are in the same room with each other less and less. So I think you're often making first impressions solely with your voice.
Well, that's very important because we sometimes work globally as well as just from other offices, and I want to remind everybody of that. Good point too. Thanks, both of you. Someone asked the question, and I guess I kind of alluded to it when I talked about the study. They said, is there a different set of traits to emphasize when job seeking than when on the job? And I'm not sure that there is. Does anybody have a thought about that?
Well,
Jim,
I would say, go ahead, Paula.
No, I was just saying I'll let you jump in on that.
I would answer the question no, that there's really not a difference, but I do think that in both cases, people need to be prepared to talk with confidence and enthusiasm either about what they do or what they would like to do. And a great example is we try to teach our attorneys at the firm to have an elevator pitch that concisely describes what they do in a way that is understandable to a layperson and that it's interesting, and also be able to explain what the firm does in a way that a layperson can understand and finds interesting. So some attorneys will just say in a self-deprecating way, well, I'm a litigator and I sue people. And that's not really advancing, the ball. It's an easy thing to say in casual conversation, but people ought to really think about something that they feel a bit more vested in, and makes what they do sound interesting.
Okay, that's a touchy one, but I think, again, it's that line between displaying your traits, like, if you want to say you're a good writer, well, write a good cover letter. Sometimes you don't need to narrate and say, what your traits are as you think about emphasizing them in the job search, but clearly you want to, on the job as well, demonstrate them. And some more questions are coming in. So let me look at them while we switch up the tempo a bit, because Paula had a couple tips, and then Jim has a couple, and I think we're sort of on this one, Paula, become your own lawyer and believe in your success when we're talking about things like confidence and displaying your best traits. Can you say a couple words about that and then go on to your next tip?
Sure, absolutely. I think, the believing in your own success piece kind of ties back into what I was saying earlier about learning how to develop that optimistic thinking style. And just to describe a little bit more what that means, so when I say optimism, I think a lot of people think, oh my gosh, it's all about rainbows and unicorns and happiness and Disney movies, and that's not what this is about at all. In fact, it's a thinking style that is completely tied to reality. So it's essentially, what do you say to yourself when something goes wrong? So an optimistic thinker is going to acknowledge that maybe, the thing will not be so great for a while, but it's going to be over with at some point. And optimistic thinkers are really, really good at seeing solutions and where they have leverage and control. Pessimistic thinkers wildly underestimate where they have control and influence and leverage. So that's a hallmark trait of somebody who thinks in an optimistic thinking style.
Okay, great. Well, when you talk about what if and what else thinking, is that having anything to do with optimism, pessimism, or is that another trait, success trait, the what if and what else tip?
So what if and what else tip, I think, would be another success trait. So I talk to a lot of people who oftentimes find themselves stuck when it comes to starting projects, jumping back into projects. And one of the things that I actually ask them a couple of different questions to help them get unstuck. And the first one is, what would you do if you had 5 minutes to work on the project? So a lot of times people laugh and say, well, hey, I've got to spend, the next 4 hours working on this project. That question is all about helping you just get started. And then following up with that, another question would be, what else could you do to move the project along by only 1%? So sometimes when we have these really big things that we're working on, just taking that first step and sort of tricking your brain into getting itself going is all you need to help you manage your time and projects better.
So this success trait in part is efficiency, effectiveness, project management. Good project management techniques, etc. All right.
Yes.
Jim's got a couple tips here, but Jim, as you talk about engaging in introspection in deciding how to describe your value and integrating your interests in your work, let me just say that a lot of the questions that are coming in are about job search. They were sort of how can you prove you have tenacity and a good work ethic if you don't have the experience behind you, or if you don't really have something to say about that in an interview. Is humor a good trait to sort of use to advance the conversation? So I don't want to steer you too far off what you were going to say about your 2 tips, but keep that in mind. We tend to be getting some questions about success traits in finding jobs as well as in performing them. Jim, your tips.
Right. Well, I guess to address your point about tenacity, if you don't have the job experience and you're trying to show a success trait, I think you can draw from your education or some time in your life where you've demonstrated your tenacity. I don't think it needs to be in a legal career. And just to go back what I was saying a moment ago about an elevator pitch, that can also, when I think of it in terms of an attorney who already has a position, but it also applies to someone looking for a position which capsulizes what you think you bring to the table and what you do and what you are able to do. And ideally, you connect it with what your interests really are and what your passion is. I think that's going to help you come across with more enthusiasm and with more energy as we talked about at the beginning.
Okay. All right, and then what about your tip about integrating your interests in your work? How does that relate to success traits?
Well, I think that any attorney who is able to connect at least part of their work with something that they're passionate about, helping individuals on some level, thinking through puzzles, thinking through tough issues, taking complex issues and writing them in more simple terms. If you are able to make that connection somewhere in your practice, you're more likely to come across as someone who is again energetic, enthusiastic about their career and with confidence and have these traits that at the end of the day make other people want to work with you.
And I also think that's a good point, because when you integrate your interests, sometimes it helps you when you are moving toward partnership and you want to think about developing business in your work. And one of the audience members just asked if we could please comment on tips to make the transition, or he actually said jump, but I'll say transition, from associate to partner. What are some of the success traits, particularly at that juncture, or as you anticipate being promoted, and even if you're not in a law firm where partnership is the issue, what are some of the more advanced success traits you need to think about at those junctures?
Well, I think that as you get more senior, that the trustworthy trait becomes more important. And what I mean by that is the notion of attorney as trusted advisor, someone who others are comfortable confiding in, telling things that may be very uncomfortable for a client, and they need to view the attorney as someone who can sort of guide them through a difficult time. And I think there are various ways that you can demonstrate being a trusted advisor, but I think as you get more senior, that becomes more and more imperative.
Paula?
Yeah, and I think it's also too, thinking about your own style of leadership and how you want to lead other people, figuring out how you can exert more influence, how you can improve your own productivity and the productivity of the people that you're leading. And again, kind of going back to the resilience trait that we talked about, how do you bounce back when things go wrong, and do you bounce back quickly? So being able to look at all of those different facets is important, and so that also touches on, the success traits we talked about in terms of being organized, being a resource to other people, and bottom line, do you bring a lot of enthusiasm and energy to what you do?
I think that one of our audience members asked if these traits, and he specifically asked, or she specifically in this case asked about being an optimistic thinker, are natural traits or are they learned behaviors? When we think about, a success trait of being, say, calm in the face of a challenge, is that something you can actually learn if you're not good at that, or if you tend to always have been, a little more active in the face of a challenge?
Yes, Kathy, I'll take that one. So for sure, when we talk about having an optimistic thinking style, we talk about a set of skills that people can learn versus having more of an optimistic personality, which is less of a learned thing and something more that you're born with. So optimistic thinking is absolutely something that can be learned. And as I mentioned, one of the traits of being an optimistic thinker is being solution focused. So I know, as I was looking through some of the questions, and as you mentioned, for people who are stuck, trying to figure out how do I get a job or how do I advance in the job that I have, figure out where you have control and influence and leverage in those situations. So you might not be able to control the hiring market, but focus your time and energy in where you do have control. Can you volunteer for a job? Can you reach out to existing attorneys to ask advice? So look in those areas.
Okay, great. Let's switch it up. I invite people to continue to send in their questions, but let's switch it up to the agree-disagree moment. The first one I wanted to ask, and I think, let me ask Jim this one. At the end of the day, Jim, the traits required for success in the so-called soft skills, like being a good mentor or mentee, are they less of a priority? So I guess than hard skills. So I guess I phrase this like success traits for hard skills trump those for soft skills. What do you say? Agree, disagree?
Well, let's take the example of being a good mentor and maybe the hard skills that you might have for something like negotiating. I would disagree that the hard skill traits are more important. I would say in that instance, for example, having a degree of empathy and understanding what the other party, what's going on with them, are equally important. I think if you're a skilled negotiator, for example, you have an idea of what the other side is seeking and what their goals are. If you're an effective mentor, then you have gotten to know your mentee well enough to have an understanding of what it is they're trying to do in their career. So I would say I disagree.
Okay, all right. I think that's important for people to think about because sometimes we as lawyers, tend to focus on those, so to speak, hard skills and consider some of the rest of these traits, sort of optional. And actually, what I'm hearing you say is, they can be similar, they can overlap, and they're all important. So let me ask you, if I'm understanding that, though, Paula, here's an agree-disagree for you. If you lack some or even all of these traits for success on the job, you may still succeed. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. But I think one of the things, though, that you have to take into consideration, as attorneys, regardless of where you are, newer or more seasoned, is the whole notion of burnout and understanding that, even though you might lack some of the success traits, being focused on and paying attention to, are you burning out at work, is something that's really important to monitor during and throughout your career.
There's a fascinating question that just came in, you guys, from a law professor, and the person asks, how do you teach some of these skills where students do not have them? So how do you teach them, say, in school, or how do you, teach them on the job? Let me ask you this. Let's focus on one that I think tends to really mess people up, frankly. They might think that they should become indispensable as a success trait. I should be indispensable to my boss. And therefore, they actually don't know how to say yes or no. They just know how to sort of take too much work and maybe become overextended. Is this something that can be taught? Because people are always afraid to say no.
I absolutely think it's something that can be taught, and I can put myself back at when I was practicing. That was me. I was the person who very rarely said no to anything, and after a number of years of doing that, I burned out. So I think it's part of it is getting past our own fear of what will other people think of me if I say no. Will the partner who I work for still be willing to give me work if they see me saying no to things? And really it comes down to practicing setting those boundaries for yourself because it's absolutely crucial.
So, Jim, how would you teach that? How would you go about possibly advise the law professor, or how would you, go about teaching that in the law firm setting to the lawyers who find themselves striving, to be optimistic, positive, and then take on too much work and go wrong?
Well, I'm a big believer in finding role models and finding others whose careers that you would like to emulate. And probably somewhere along the line, they themselves have become indispensable to people with whom they work. And getting to know how they did it. And becoming indispensable doesn't happen all at once. And there's probably a bit of a learning curve at the beginning, or there's a period of time in which you really have to go above and beyond someone to prove yourself to them and to make that really positive first impression. But then, over time, as the trust factor goes up, being indispensable, you can still be indispensable, but you're in more of a position to delegate to others. You're in more of a position to occasionally say no, but to guide the person to someone else who can help them. And that's something that you can learn on the job. I'm confident in that.
All right. And I think that the law professor can even have experience trying to set up simulations where, there are sort of interactions in the workplace as a mock setting, and give advice and tie it in if they want to the substantive topic they're teaching, but help people understand how to be responsive and give commentary on that. Maybe invite in an adjunct or invite in a practitioner who's an alum. Actually get into some of these practice traits that they call practice readiness, and give some concrete feedback. And also, I think there's a lot of studies on how, and I don't think this professor is necessarily guilty of it at all, but how law students come out more depressed than at a higher percentage than other graduate students, because sometimes the professors, in their methods, don't help people gain confidence. They, sometimes do the opposite, not unwittingly. And so we want law school to be rigorous and focused, but we also want, professors to understand, how difficult the market is in the real world, and how you do need to come out with some resilience and confidence and believing that you can, really make a point, and even if it isn't quite right, or you're not so sure about the next point, that your thinking is good. And I think that's something we can encourage on the law school level. But going to another question, which I think Paula can comment on, if you would, kind of quickly. Somebody asked, because you talked about burning out, and we've mentioned the downside of some of these things. So what are the symptoms of burnout? I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I bet you can give some quick thoughts on that.
Sure. There's lots of symptoms, but there's three big categories for when you're burning out. One is feeling really disengaged and detached from what you're doing. You just really don't want to get out of bed and go to work. The second one is feeling really cynical, so not just having a bad day, but really feeling that cynicism. And the third one is just feeling ineffective. Again, like you aren't connecting as much with what you're doing.
Interesting. So there's this line. I mean, you could try to, disengage to be, not to take everything personally, not to be overly sensitive. Those are success traits too. But then there's this line where, if people might, really be perceiving, and you might really be feeling that there is something more going on than that. Is that
correct? Yes.
Jim, do you have some thoughts about that from what you see in associates and not necessarily the firm you're at, because you've been at other places too and work broadly, but where you start to see the sort of some signs that associates aren't maybe displaying their getting the point of how to get successful quickly, but are feeling a little bit underwater.
Oh, definitely, and it often happens when people feel stuck, and that their status quo has to remain what it is. And I think this is where the traits of being resourceful and being proactive are huge. At my firm, for example, we ask all of our attorneys to do personal professional development plans, where they can look forward over the next 12 months or whatever period of time, and to set out what they hope to do in the coming months. And so they really do have a lot of freedom to say, I would like to grow as an attorney in such and such areas by doing certain types of things, or I would like to work on certain client teams. And that affords them the opportunity to think through what it is they would like to do. And I think that by remembering that they have some amount of freedom to what am I trying to say, to sort of shape their career, I think that can go a long way toward thwarting burnout.
And I think there's a few audience questions that really follow up on this, what you just said, which has to do with when do you sort of stick with the place you're working? If you're feeling, you might be burning out, do you stick with it and get over a hump? Or if you feel there's a real disconnect between the culture where you're working and the success traits you value, might some of these be signals about thinking about changing jobs?
Well, I'm a big believer in introspection, and I think revisiting from time to time why you chose to become an attorney in the first place, or when you graduated, what it was that you hoped to do, and these things tie directly into your passions. And I think periodically it's worth revisiting whether there's any likelihood in your current position that you can one way or another be delving into those passions at least part of the time. And if the answer is consistently no, and you really feel like you've investigated your options, then I would say that's a pretty good signal that your current job is not going to be your road to career satisfaction.
Right, and you talked about having, mentors and role models, about, taking people in confidence and asking them. You might say, I'm noticing other people getting, the kind of work I've asked for, and I'm not getting it. Who should I reach out to? How can I do better? And if after you've tried, you feel that, it isn't the place for you, then there's no harm in, looking at the market. But, actually, last question here, and then I want to go to our takeaways. But a law professor also said, Jim, when you talk about doing a professional development plan, are there any redacted samples that maybe we can put up on the website after the program? He asked about encouraging law students to consider something similar for themselves, anticipating, both while they're in law school and also anticipating getting into the work world. Might there be something you could take a look at and see if there's anything as a sample that you could redact and post afterward with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to look into that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, I think we need to get to some of our takeaways, because I think this is an important piece of the puzzle. How the people who are with us on the program can actually continue to think about what we've talked about, but also do some things to strengthen, deepen, develop their success and success traits. So, what do you mean, Paula? You said to become a more assertive communicator, make your case with all caps. What do you mean?
Yeah, so for me, this gets back to the success trait of one of the things that I mentioned, building strong relationships, being responsive. How do you have a clear, confident, and controlled communication with someone so that you can build those relationships going forward? So CASE is just the acronym to remember when you're thinking about how do I have this type of clear, confident, and controlled conversation. So the C is starting you off with just communicating the facts to somebody. So lawyers are good at this, the who, the what, the where, the when. The A is about addressing your concerns in an objective way. So it's important here to minimize exaggeration. The S is about specifying concrete actions that you want the other person to take and making sure you ask for their perspective about the situation and what's going on. And finally, the E is about evaluating outcomes. Lawyers are good at negotiating, so negotiate, what you want to come out of the conversation, and then summarize the courses of action and the action steps that are to be taken going forward.
And so the success trait also is, in addition to becoming a more assertive communicator, what else does the case steps? What does that give you in terms of success traits?
Yeah, we had talked about this earlier a lot, and I think it's a really big target on the success trait of confidence. So when you're able to know that you can go into a conversation and remain clear and confident, regardless of whether you're sort of talking up the chain with a partner, whether you're talking with your assistant and other people that you lead, whether you're talking with your colleagues. Being confident in that is really important, and this model will help you do that.
Okay, the model, one of the listeners asked if we could please clarify the A. Why don't you quickly just repeat the CASE again so people have that, and I think then we'll get to takeaway from Jim. CASE,
sure.
Go over that quickly again.
Sure. The C is communicating the facts, the who, the what, the where, the when. The A is just about addressing your concerns in an objective way. So minimize exaggeration. Instead of going to someone and saying, why did you do that? You always do this. Be clear and very objective in terms of how you address your concerns. The S is specifying the concrete actions that you want the other person to take. And the E is just both parties evaluating outcomes, suggesting good alternatives, and negotiating what they want out of the conversation.
All right, that sort of leads us. Thanks. It leads us to a takeaway that Jim had. Case being about communicating. Jim, you had a takeaway about becoming a better listener.
Right. I think that listening skills is one of the most undervalued traits in the legal profession. Lawyers have a reputation for liking to hear themselves talk. And the fact of the matter is, attorneys, one of their big roles, and I alluded to this before when I referred to trusted advisor, is about having other people, their clients, come to them and confiding in them and telling them some complicated fact pattern or something that's extremely sensitive. And I think attorneys serve themselves by resisting the temptation to always jump in and offer their opinions, and to really become a thoughtful listener and really try to stand in the client's shoes or stand in their colleagues' shoes and reflect before just jumping in with a thought. And I think that I have noticed in my years of both practicing and being on the professional development side that the attorneys who are good listeners, and this includes some very senior attorneys, they have just stood out to me, because what ultimately comes out of their mouths when they've heard me out or they've heard out others is extremely valuable and well thought out.
I think, and then also that leads to another takeaway you had about observing and modeling the traits of others, even the more senior lawyers with whom you come in contact. Not that you could be them, but what can you do? What is your tip? What is your takeaway for them on this point?
Right. I think, and this especially applies to more junior attorneys, but it does apply to everybody, which is to really pay attention to the people who you work with, or maybe even the attorneys who are on the other side of a matter, and try and take away what you really admire about how they conduct themselves and what you don't admire, and learn by watching, and then ultimately come up with a style that works best for you and that's personalized to yourself. And I think that will enable you to be more successful.
I find that very, very important as a takeaway, because using your own judgment, sort of filtering what you see, what you hear, what you observe, and then sort of picking and choosing the best for you. That's such an important takeaway. People should practice constantly. New lawyers sometimes see uncivil behavior from other lawyers, and they think, or the TV behavior of lawyers, and they think that's the way a lawyer should be acting. And actually, it might be good when you observe that to test that out with a more senior person, the people that Paula and Jim are talking about, to say, this is what I saw. Is that going to be what it takes? I don't really think I'm comfortable with that. More than likely, you're going to hear that's not what it takes, and we don't look for that in this workplace. And so you really do need to check your assumptions about success and what makes for success in others. And that's why, circling back to my original point, this is a really tricky topic. People might, have thought, success traits, sure, that's so obvious. But the fact is there's we want you to speak, we want you to listen, we want you to think, we want you to be confident and jump in. We want you to do all of it, and to sort of as a mosaic, be managing it thoughtfully. You find that you have to do that when you're in court. You have to be able to do that on your feet when you're in negotiations or other transactional roles. You may be sitting, but you're doing that as well. These success traits really do translate for continual effectiveness. And we want to invite you to read the articles that are posted on the website, but also read business literature. Filter what applies to lawyers and what might not. But don't shy away from looking into this. There's learning, and it's much deeper in addition to what we talked about today. It's a beginning of the conversation. And speaking of that, we want to point you to the Career Advice Live site, because that's where those articles are. It's at www.ambar.org/4. So it's .org/4advice. Every month we'll tell you what's coming up in the programming. You can always go register. We invite you to do that after this program for the January program, but we want you to look there, and we also want to invite you to look on the Career Center website generally, and we have the URL in the last slide. I know that the evaluation is going to be coming up on your screen. We hope you'll wait for that. I want to thank our wonderful faculty, Jim Lovelace and Paula Davis-Laack. You were just terrific. And all of you listening, we really appreciate it. Stay with us in the future for the Career Advice Live programs. On behalf of the ABA, I'm Kathy Morris, and I thank you all.